Welcome to Blending the Family, the podcast. Topics can range from dads hitting rock bottom, daughters watching their parents divorce, or even what is a good wine for couples to have while talking about finances. Here's your host, and yes, we'll admit that he is regifted, Tommy Maloney.
Oh my gosh, it's great to be home. Welcome to another episode of the podcast known as Blending the Family. This is the 7th time I've had to re-record this intro. I am in the home office. I'm back. I was in Colorado Springs for part of the dreaded day job. Work ended up getting canceled. I love my boss. Love him to death. 4:30, I see an email. I say. Anyway, see a text message and an email about 10:05 a.m. And my alarm was actually set for 5:30. Go to the gym, and I did go to the gym, by the way. And we'll talk about that briefly. But he said, "You're done. Go home." I said, "All right." And this is one of those things where I'm really blessed and grateful that I'm not a contractor where I would lose pay. It's good to be a salary type person. Hey, if this is your first time tuning in, my name's Tommy Maloney. I am the host of this podcast. Again, Blending the Family. On today's episode, we have Dr. Barbara Lowe. She is a licensed psychologist who founded and owns her own practice in Durham, North Carolina. And to me, this is cool, of a person who is striving to be a solopreneur or an entrepreneur. Dr. Barbara, she let me call her Dr. Barbara. She has 15 employees. How cool is that? That is so cool. That's going to be my goal one day. To have employees, paid employees. We'll have our voice guy. He'll get paid. My brother of another mother, Johnny Nomad. Have you checked out his podcast? He and his wife's podcast on Anchor called Couples Corner. He'll be my graphic designer. Anyway, I was having so many technical problems. I'm digressing. Technical problems trying to put this podcast together in the hotel. Again, in lovely, beautiful Colorado Springs. So when my boss told me I can go back home, I'm like, all right, I'm re-recording Barbara's intro because I stalked her. Sorry, Dr. Barbara. I screwed it up so many times last night that I'm happy to be home. Please, if you are a praying person, ironically, this episode we're going to talk about faith, God, finding your calling. Our daughter Becca had knee surgery today. So today being Thursday, and you're going to hear this podcast on Friday, so the day before. Please think of her. Speaking of medical, we want to talk briefly about Duke. Duke is doing great. He's been eating a lot, which is a good thing. He hadn't been eating. If you're not familiar with Duke, he's our you hear him on the intro. Barking. He's our chocolate lab. He'll be 16 in March, but he's doing great. So happy, so happy. Every once in a while you come home and he's laying down and you have to get right next to him and make sure he's breathing. All right, I just want to move on. I'm going to move on. We're going to talk about Dr. Barbara Lowe, aka Dr. Barbara. Again, she's a licensed psychologist who founded and owns her own practice. She is also a board-certified life coach, somatic experiencing practitioner. Try and say that once. She's a speaker, author, a lay minister. She's a wife, mother, a stepmother, and has used her training and the wounds of her past to minister professionally and personally to women for many years. Dr. Barbara has created the Heart's Returning Home method for overcoming difficult childhood experiences and messages to help women move from quote, "Where's the life I dreamed of," unquote, to real soul satisfaction and kick butt success in life. I'm going to say kick ass because, hey, it's my darn show, right? She offers blogs, video blogs, podcasts, courses, incentives, and retreats at drbarbaralowe.com. That's Dr. Barbaralowe. That's Lowe with an E.com, drbarbaralowe.com. So visit her, and we'll have more links in the show notes of Dr. Barbara. We talk about her aha moment, how she found her calling after having a very rough teenage childhood, finding her mission in college, and there you go. I hope you enjoy this episode, and as my dear friend Terry Crews would say, your success is my success. Have a great day. Bye. Thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Barbara.
I'm so excited to be here, Tommy.
I love your bio. I love the fact that you have some ministry in your background.
Yep.
You are I always get mixed up, and I apologize because I'm not a trained professional, between a psychologist and a psychiatrist.
Right. So a psychiatrist is an MD. So they're a physician, and they can prescribe medications.
Okay.
Some psychiatrists also do therapy or behavioral interventions. And then a psychologist just does the behavioral interventions. Yeah.
How did you? I mean, what was the calling for that?
Oh, that's a good story. So I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. As a part of that, I was also a step kid. But my parents split up, and my mom remarried when I was 13, and my mom and my mom and my dad and my stepdad, they all had substance abuse problems. So just very dysfunctional. There was a lot of abuse. I would have to say, of all the folks, my stepdad was actually the least abusive, which is interesting. He was just kind of a withdrawer, right? So there was a lot of hurt. There was a lot of pain. I became a Christian when I was 19 years old. And through that process, really, I began a healing process and felt very early on that I was called to minister to the hurting and was called to go to school. I had almost failed out of high school, which is interesting because I just hardly ever went. I mean, I was so messed up. And my mom had actually kicked me out of the house for a couple months of my senior year, kind of in a drunken rage. And then she never let me back in. And so I kind of thought I was stupid, and ended up going to college, majored in psychology, and I got straight A's. I was valedictorian.
Wow.
And yeah, so it wasn't stupid, and really just felt that God was calling me to be a psychologist, and ended up I actually went through a divorce that I didn't want right after my kids were born. So
Well, I have to interrupt there.
yeah.
When do you want a divorce?
Yep. Yep. Preach. That is so true. Yeah. So
I mean, I'll never forget, before I got married the first time, I get in. I'm not a math person. My kids will tell you I suck at math, and that's probably my own wall, my own defense mechanism when numbers are thrown around. But I remember looking at statistics before I got married the first time, and it said if you come from a family of divorce, you have a high probability of getting divorced. I'm like, I'm going to prove them wrong. Yeah, that didn't work.
Yep. Well, so same, my friend. And so I had two little babies, and I was like, gosh, I had planned on going back to school. I guess I need to go ahead and go back to school now, because I did have some alimony. And so That was really hard. I ended up going back to school, not staying home with my kids as long as I wanted to. But as it turned out, I have ended up, now I'm a psychologist. I have this burgeoning practice, and I get to spend my days and some evenings healing lives, and that's what my life is all about. And there's been a tremendous amount of healing for me and process and progress along the way that the Lord has taken me through. And so it's been this combination of clinical skills that I've learned that have ministered to others, but also healing to me. And then also my walk with the Lord and how he's interacted with all that. And so now it's like transformative trauma. I get to give all of it away, and I love my life. I really do.
So let me ask you this, because a lot of the listeners that have stuck with me understand that I've gone through my own transition of finding my faith. I owe a lot to my wife, who is very deeply into her faith, and she's the one who brought me into her church. And I mean, I went to Catholic school, but to me, it didn't really resonate with me. I
Uh-huh.
was just trying to survive. I was not a very good student. I I learned that late in life. Unfortunately, I was one of those people that should never have gone to college, and just because of just I don't. And I've learned even through work. I'm not a person that can sit in one place day after day. I have to be somewhere else. Even though I love, you and I are here talking. You're in North Carolina. I'm here in Colorado, and we're both in our home offices. And I love this because this is, I don't want to say this is my church, but this is where I can really focus.
Yeah.
As a day job, and again, as the listeners love to hear me gripe about so-called dreaded day jobs I've gone through, um, I've learned that I have to be out and about type. And the point I'm trying to make here is that because of my wife, I I just I never had that type of calling of there's a God and there's somebody that's watching over me, and that they already have a path for me and things like that. But it's funny because my wife will actually, I don't want to say I came up with it, but I tell her every once in a while. I could be in a lift, just having a chat with the driver, and I call it my God moments,
Mhm.
because something connected. There was a purpose for me to be in that specific car, or being in Toronto, Canada, and talking to somebody, and not talking about work, but talking about something that's in your wheelhouse, about helping people as a life coach. And so, my question to you, Dr. Barber, is: it sounds like in college is when you found your faith. What was that aha moment for you to find your purpose, and why God spoke to you, or how?
Yeah. So it was actually before college, but it was at college age. So I went to college after I was a Christian. So growing up, there were some Christians who had witnessed to me, they'd prayed for me, and I set that aside. But other than that, there wasn't very much Christian influence. I have a feeling, though, that they prayed me into the kingdom. When I was 19, I came to a place where I was really tired of myself. I was depressed. I had eating disorders. I was using substances, and I just felt like something needed to change because I cannot live this way. And I did begin to seek some help in some different ways. And at the same time, the Lord began to slowly, like playing chess or checkers, he just began to surround me with Christians. And I remember one time being in my car, I'd gone for a job interview and was going to start working with kids and families at this particular job, which is interesting because I've really done that my whole life since, and working with women. But anyway, I was in my car after this job interview, and I felt this presence come into my car, and I said, are you Jesus? Which is not, you got to understand, this is not language I would typically use. And I, in particular, was open to any God but Jesus. I was like trying on all the new age stuff, and his presence came, and I had that moment, but I still did not surrender to him. And I kind of put that behind me again. But I had these little moments where God was reaching out to me. And I think just kind of tenderizing my heart, softening my heart. I'm really what you need. I created this God box because I began to become open to God as a higher power through some of the supports I was getting. So I was like, okay, my higher power. And so I would say, God, whoever you are, and I would put prayers in the God box, and
Okay.
and just, God, whoever you are. And I began to say, God, show me who you are. And one night I was stuck. I was a nanny at this time, and I was stuck at home, and I really wanted to get out. I was so antsy. And that night, two different people came really to share the gospel with me. They hadn't intended it. I wasn't even supposed to be home. They hadn't planned it. And it was people that came independently of each other. And so I was saved that night. I became a Christian, and it really has transformed my life. And I can say that I do hear him and have a relationship with him on a daily basis. And yet I'm not overly religious. To me, it's about relationship. I'm very non-judgmental. I just love the Lord.
What would you say? Because my wife and I have had this discussion, and it was one of the discussions that we needed to have, especially as a blended family,
Mhm.
of religion. As far as you're taking two new households, blending them under one roof.
Mhm.
What would you say in your experience, and what would you also say to the listeners of bringing religion into a new family?
Mhm.
How do you, I don't want to say soften the blow, but how do you bring that conversation in? Because, one of the first things, I've coached other families is, yes, you have to talk about the finances, but if somebody has a faith and they're very strong in their faith and the other person doesn't, how do you broach that subject, or how have you with your practice?
So are you talking about two parents being in different places with faith, or the kids? Parent?
Actually, both.
Well, I would say with the kids that the younger the kids are, when you have a blended family come together, the more that you can kind of shape it the way that you want. I'm going to be honest with your listeners and say that I've been divorced 2 times. And I didn't want either one. I would have stayed with both of those men. I am remarried to someone who used to be my pastor, and very, very happily married. And we serve the Lord together. But I've been a stepmom in different ways. So I can say I've lived this, and my kids have lived this. And I can also say to everyone, no matter what failures or perceived failures but you've been through, God can turn it around to ministry, because I'm a relationship specialist. It's what I do for a living, relationship with yourself, relationship with others, relationship with God. And I'm really good at it. And yet I have these circumstances. So I can say I've lived this. And so my stepkids, and they were young when we all got together. And so they were kind of like a pile of puppies. And my and so we could kind of shape that. Now, I love a more like spirit-filled, raise your hands kind of church. And my ex-husband, he was more like Baptist, give me a hymn and a pew. And so we kind of settled on a Methodist church with a contemporary service. And I'm a big advocate of not, figuring out where you can compromise, and within the marriage, because you don't want to rock the boat, and you want to have unity without compromising too much individuality. And it's complex, because in step families you have, let me back up. In a non-step family, you have one cohesive unit. In step families, you have these cohesive units that are tied together like a Venn diagram in different ways, and there are different allegiances that impact the family unit that you don't have, that you do not have outside of a blended family.
And I have to stop you right there
Tell me.
because you bring up a great point.
Mhm.
And my wife and I last night were, ironically, we were on our way to help out at Toys for Tots. And we were talking about, so in our situation, Dr. Barber, we have, between my wife and I, we have 3 kids.
Mhm.
The oldest will be 22 in the month of January. We have a 17-year-old who is my wife's other daughter, and then my son who's 15. And he on Sunday he had a hockey game, and as he was coming out of the locker room, he had this. It was hilarious. This big. I don't know how to describe it other than it was a. It looked like something Santa would wear, but it was in the shape of a sombrero. I mean, hilarious. And I'll have to put a picture of that somewhere. But it was hilarious, and I thought because on a lot of youth teams after a game, a lot of the coaches will uh, award somebody like the MVP of that game.
Yeah.
And so when my son came out of the locker room with that, I go, and I mean, the team won. He played really well. And I thought, oh, you're wearing that because you got the MVP. And he hesitated. And this is the kind, again, the conversation, I heard it, I was living it, but when my wife replayed it for me, I understood it. And this is going to go along your point. And I said to my son Connor, I go, hey, did you get MVP? Is that why you're wearing that hat? And he paused and he said, no, mom got it from me. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. That is hard on kids because, like you're talking about, their allegiance is to their parents, but
Mhm.
they don't want to, wreck that allegiance.
Mhm.
And so, one of the things that my wife suggested is that if I come in that situation again, instead of sort of hanging him off a cliff, to say, "Oh my gosh, that is so cool. Your mom got you that? That
Mhm.
is wonderful." And so I think a lot of us that are, it will be, let's see, 2018, 10 years since I've been divorced.
Mhm.
And even after 10 years, there's still, just a little bit of anger issues. And of course, I was a little bit jealous that my former wife got him this really, again, it was so hilarious.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I'm sitting back going, well, I wish I had done that. I wish I had thought of that. So and I apologize for interrupting, but to your point, that is hard. It's really hard for kids to have, trying to stick to both parents, but when they get somewhat caught in the middle, it's hard for them to handle that.
Yes. I don't know how you're gonna feel about this, Tommy, but I'm gonna tell you what I recommend and what I say in my office and what I've told my stepkids.
Bring it. I'm an open book, and if you want to analyze me, I'm all for it.
Well, I'm okay with you disagreeing with me, and that would make a great conversation for the listeners, I'm sure. I encourage step parents to be okay with that they will always love their own children more than their stepchildren. And I encourage stepchildren to be okay with they will always love their own parents more than their step parents. And I think to act like that's not happening is causes more problems than what it prevents, because we have to, I think, acknowledge that there are these allegiances that are stronger, because it helps us talk about what's fair, because we often are going to want to innately act a certain way towards our own children versus our stepchildren, even though we don't want to. It's like Paul, why do I do what I don't want to do? And I think if we acknowledge it and take away the guilt, then it helps. I think it's also really, really normal to be jealous of your child's attention to the other parent. I think that we need to accept it, but not act out of it, because every parent that I talk to, almost every, feels this temptation to be in a competition with the other parent. It is normal. And so it's kind of like what we do as parents all the time. We say, I want to have mercy. Well, right now I'm disciplining one of my kids who's 19. I had to ask him to move out because of some choices he's making. My mama heart is breaking. I want him home where I can watch every move he makes. But as a parent, I can't move out of my emotions. I have to do what I think is right. So I'm still reaching out to him. I'm still taking him out to lunch. I'm still texting him. I'm still loving him. But I also say, it was 3 strikes and you're out, and I'm sorry. And I won't go into it to protect him, but it was a reasonable thing that I'm asking him to do. It's something most parents aren't comfortable with that he was doing. And so it's similar. It's normal that I want to have him home and protect him. It's also normal that I want my child's attention. As a matter of fact, he is living with his dad now. And so, I have to just be okay with that. And frankly, I am glad he's with his dad and instead of someone else. But yeah, those are temptations are normal. And I think the more we normalize it, the healthier we can actually be, and the more we can create healthy blended family systems.
And you bring up the question I wanted to really ask you, and that is, I was saying before we hit record, in our household, we don't use the word step. I mean, we're at the point, luckily right now, after my wife and I celebrate 6 years in September, that with the kids, we started off with using the word bonus.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why was I never liked the word step.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll always remember, and I think it's one of those few rare occasions where TV created a positive message, and that was with the Brady Bunch. And there was one episode where I think it was Bobby Brady said, "Well, my stepsister Cindy," and the mom Carol said, "The only steps in this house lead upstairs." And I've always loved that because, again, in movies you have the evil stepmom, the evil stepdad, and I'm just like, what word can create right off the bat a positive um, atmosphere? Because again, the kids, sometimes it feels like the kids are just thrown in without, hey, don't I have a say in it? And that was part of the reason why. And like I said, I don't know where I heard bonus, but I just fell in love with it. And so my thought or question to you is, with your clients, have they ever encountered using step in a negative way, or or am I just overthinking it? Because like I said, I'm not a fan of the word step, and I've never been a fan of step.
Right. Well, I think perception has a lot to do with our choices in a lot of different areas. And you're absolutely right that step parent has a lot of bad connotation in the media. I think it might be changing a little bit, because more kids are, I don't know the statistics, you might know them offhand, but I bet more kids are in step families or blended families, or let's say non-traditional families, than the kind of, nuclear family that was, two original parents and 2 kids. I, though, wish you could hear my stepdaughter say stepmommy. She has Down syndrome and adores me. And yeah, so it depends on how you're using it and how it feels for the child. I know that let's see, I have a stepdad, and I don't think he minds me calling him stepdad. After my mom passed away, I called him dad for a while, and I wasn't sure how comfortable he was with that. Um, and with my own stepkids, yeah, stepmommy, my stepdaughter called me, and then my other ones just called me by my first name. I do think it's personal choice. It's a combination of what the adult is comfortable with and what the kids are comfortable with. I think it is a combination of what our perceptions are around terms. I mean, if every time our stepchild says stepmom, it sounds like a bad word, then we might want to change the word. I think it's personal choice. I love bonus dad. I think it's fantastic. I mean, I think we all need bonus parents anyway, right?
I agree. And, we've gotten to the point now, like I said, my wife and I have been married for, just over 6 years. And now it's at the point where we don't even say bonus. We say, even my wife will say, "This is my son Connor," or I'll even say, "These are my daughters." And it's just, I don't know. If we got lucky in that sense that the kids got it right away. Um, I mean, my daughter, who's 17, and my son actually, many moons ago, came up to me and they wanted to write a book, and that book became 10 Tips on How to Survive Your Parents' Divorce, which is a coloring book. And they wanted to help, younger kids who just didn't have the communication skills to be able to, acknowledge that they're hurting. And again, they don't have the vocabulary, but how could they, and this is coming from them, how could they help other kids? And I just love the idea that they wanted to really help other uh, children going through separation or divorce. And the thing that you mentioned is, that's how do you as a family create those positive moments? And it goes back to, in my opinion, just, you have to communicate openly with all the kids and let them be part of decisions. That was the biggest lesson I learned after my divorce. Was a good friend of mine said, "Well, when you're picking out your son's furniture for his room, let him make the decision." And it was great. And I think, again, going back to, a lot of times kids just don't get to make, or are allowed to make, decisions when it comes to, being in a new family.
Yes. So true. Yeah, giving our kids a healthy sense of control where we can is so important when things have been out of control. Totally agree.
So, what, to stay along the lines of the world of step parenting, what can you say to, both, you know, the bonus moms, the bonus dads, when they're in situations where their uh, new bonus child just doesn't click with them,
Mhm.
and it's, I mean, I go through that situation where, um, it was reversed for me. I got along great with my bonus dad,
Mhm.
and because he set the tone. When
Mhm.
he eventually moved in with my mom and I, he didn't come in laying down the law. He was very step backish and
Mhm.
let me be me. But what can you say to, um, the parents out there who are just not able to connect with their new, um, sons and daughters?
Well, I do think a soft start is important because when we have our own children, we don't have to earn the right to discipline them because we already have really in those young ages. One of the first stages that infants go through is a trust versus distrust stage, right? And so we've already established that we're trustworthy and the world is trustworthy for them. So with our stepkids, we need to establish that. We need to establish that we're safe. And I think it's good for the parents to have a united front, but for the biological parent to take a little bit more of the discipline heat. It's just more well received. I also think that looking for ways to to be responsive, to validate who that child really is, to be safe. And sometimes that means giving some distance. Like right now, even as a parent, my son is saying, Mom, I feel like you're smothering me a little bit. I have to give him distance. It's probably really more for me that he doesn't like what I'm telling him, that he needs to make some corrections. But same with our stepkids. If they're giving us a little pushback, we need to push back. I'm thinking about, my husband is actually a natural horseman, so he trained under the guy who trained under the horse whisperer. And one of the things he taught me is that if you want to interact with a horse, you don't walk directly to the horse staring at the horse. You actually go to the side of the horse and kind of look away and let the horse get curious about you. If you do that, the horse will actually inevitably come up to you and check you out. It's a lot better way than coming directly at the horse. And I think we can use some of those tips with our stepkids. Do something they might be curious about, like let's say they think that they're into rock climbing, and hey, I think I'm going rock climbing. Oh, really? Yeah. Hey, you want to come? Something like that.
I I'm a loss for words because your horse example, one of my dearest friends who's been on this podcast, Brett, but my friends call me Zach.
Mhm.
When he and I first met, we had a very similar conversation about that. And that was building trust with other men. And he said pretty much the exact same thing you did. I wonder if he borrowed that from horses as well. But he said the same thing with guys. You really can't just go up to a guy full of energy. You have to do the same thing. You have to kind of come around to the side and just build the relationship that way. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's you know, I'm like I said, I'm a loss for words because that was the exact same scenario my friend Zach gave me, and I'm like, it makes sense. The way you phrased it with the horses, that makes sense, even more in my head. So thank you for educating me.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So in the month of January, that's where a lot of divorces are filed because uh, during the holiday season, nobody wants to broach that subject. Have you had to deal with your clients as far as uh, having them tell the kids that their parents are about to get divorced?
Yeah. Yeah. So with young kids, I recommend that, well, I definitely recommend the parents, the biological parents, or the adopted parents, the parents who are together, doing it together, and creating a lot of safety around it, telling the kids that everything's going to be okay. We love you, and pointing out everything that's going to stay the same, because this is a big change. With young kids, I recommend using a storybook. Like I have a book in here, I forget the title of it. I have a couple books that is about like Nina has two homes, I think is the title of one of the books I have in the office. So using storybooks to normalize it. And if there's a time frame for kids, a lot of kids don't have a sense of time. And then also when we're hurting, a sense of time can be kind of wacky. And so actually showing on a calendar, like if it's like there's going to be a move here, or yeah, for big changes, giving kids a visual calendar and marking off days so that they can have a sense of time. Because if you say it's going to in 3 weeks to a 4 or 5-year-old, that's really hard to conceptualize.
That's I love that. What other tips can you offer about telling the kids and helping the kids through that transition?
Well, I would say, first of all, try marriage counseling, and read some books by John Gottman and consider if this is really what you want to do, because there is so much we can do to heal marriages. Never, and then if you are going to split, never ever put the kids in the middle. Look up the books on divorce poison and parent alienation syndrome, and make sure that you do the exact opposite of what those what those concepts are talking about. The very worst thing that you can do is have your kids in the middle of your marriage or your divorce.
Right.
So they need to be kids, and they need to not be parentified, and they need to know that the world is okay and that it's safe and that they are deeply loved. And as much as possible, if you can be friends, I call it co-CEO. So let's say it's Jane and Bobby, their parents, Jane and Bobby's parents are divorcing. Well, those parents are still, even though they're divorcing, they are co-CEOs of Jane and Bobby. And so they need to figure out a working relationship. So whatever you would say to a coworker, those things are okay to say, but you can't say anything that you wouldn't say. Like you wouldn't say cuss words or put down your coworker. It wouldn't be appropriate. And if you're a coworker and you were managing a group of people below you, you wouldn't try to divide the group. It would be your job to keep the group together, cohesive, feeling safe and being productive. So I think that's a good way to think about it. Moving away, if you're going to split up, you need to move away from both positive and negative intimacy. Negative intimacy is it actually is a way to keep us tied together through fighting. And we can realize that's just a way of keeping us tied together. And I love the book. It's an oldie but goodie, Mom's House, Dad's House. And I think she has a couple other books now that she's written. She has a book for kids, and I think also a workbook now that is super, super helpful for parents who are splitting up and want to do it the right way. Oh, and I want to say this, and this is more tied to my work. I think going through a divorce or a transition or even working on a difficult marriage is a great time to work on your own hurts and wounds in your own life. Often the things that are playing out in our marriages are actually the hurts and wounds from our own pre-marriage lives, and we don't even realize it. And so I do want to put a little plug in for the Hearts Returning Home method that I use to help people heal from the traumas and the abuses in their own lives. And that's going to be coming out in a course form and also in a book form in 2019.
So let's give the listeners a little bit of cliff notes of your the book and the course.
Yeah.
I'll let you use whatever example that's going to pertain.
Sure. Well, it is a faith plus therapy plus life coaching model. So I will say that it has some Christian faith stuff sprinkled throughout it. And so I acknowledge that it's not for everyone. And I'm writing this particular curriculum in particular for women, but I see men in the office, and I know that they're going to be men who are going to love it as well. And it's a reconstruction model. So if you think about, if you're going to remodel a house or reconstruct a house, you're not going to destroy the whole thing, especially if you're living in it. You're going to keep it very livable. And so the first thing you're going to do is provide a lot of safety and stability and get your supplies together. And that's what we do in the first part of the curriculum, is really establish a lot more resources, a lot more safety, a lot more stability in your life, a lot more structure, thinking about boundaries, establishing some good cognitive and behavioral skills. And then we move into meeting unmet needs. And then I have a transforming trauma module, and also a module on boundary ruptures, where we've had relationships that have impacted the way that we move and think in the world and how we are with others, and where we kind of give too much, give too little, and just live in kind of this painful place in relationships. And we want to get out of patterns. And then at the end, we kind of launch more into what's my purpose, because when you grow up in a healthy home, you automatically move into purpose, usually. And here we're restoring a healthy home to your heart. We're giving you the healthy home that you didn't have in reality. We're giving it to you through this healing process so that you can be all that you want to be, all that you're called to be. And yeah, it's effective. It's worked in many people's lives. In my office, I have a really long waiting list. And so this is a way that I can reach people outside of my clinical practice.
how you can clone yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
What,
My heart really is to help others. My heart beats to help others. I've been given much. I've had a lot of trauma, more than I've talked about here, but I've also been given so much, and I just want to give it away.
what, and I apologize if this sounds like a very basic question, but what specifically do you mean by unmet needs?
So we have needs for connection. We have needs to build trust. We have needs to have our parents as a secure base or our primary caregivers. We have needs to not have food scarcity, right? To have our needs of food met. We have a need to feel secure. We have a need to be able to go out and explore life with the sense of no matter what happens, I can come back in and have my needs met. And so I've developed some tools. I've used a whole bunch of different therapies and spiritual tools. I've combined them together to kind of like a parsimonious or more simple way of seeing needs met. I can go into it a lot more depth and a lot more technically, and you can ask any question you want, but it's basically meeting those needs because we have traumas that happen to us, and then we have needs that weren't met. And so I address both of those in this curriculum.
What is in your somatic?
Somatic experiencing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's basically working with the nervous system. So you think about even with the horse, you think about what you're doing when you're coming up to a horse is you're giving the horse an opportunity to regulate to your presence there and approach rather than going into like a fight or flight kind of feeling or like I need to get away. And so with somatic experiencing, it's a 3-year credential. I think I've spent like 300 hours on it. It's pretty intense, but I've learned to work with the nervous system and how the nervous system is impacted by trauma and how to be able to reverse the effects of trauma. And it's really like a bottom up kind of processing. So some of my training is about changing the way we think. And other parts of my training are about really working directly with the nervous system and letting things that are like stuck in the nervous system discharge, like when things come at us too fast for us to process or we're too young for it to process. And so it kind of gets stuck in our brains and like our brainstem, and we need it to be integrated into other parts of our brain and transformed and discharged in ways where we can stop having the past be present. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. It does. Um, Dr. Barbara Lowe, I want to say thank you again for joining me after, like I emailed you, my wife's bad luck rubbed off on me this morning.
That was so funny.
But before I go, I want you to take a step back. And as you were gracious enough to share that you have gone through your 3 marriages and hope the final one too, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, could you, what one takeaway have you learned through your own life lessons of
Mhm.
getting married, divorced, and now married? What one big takeaway can you share that you learned that you really you didn't know at the time, but then you end up learning, if that
Mhm.
makes sense?
Yes. I would say that the past, you think the past is in the past, but the past is present and it is affecting your current relationship. And it is important to deal with your past. When with our spouses, we are or our partners, we are fighting over things that we think we're fighting over things in the present, but it's actually things in the past usually. Let's see, Terry Real has this thing called core negative image, and it's when with our partner. So I see something in my partner where it's probably 25% real, something is going on. But I also have this thing in my history. Okay, so I can give an example from my marriage. My mom used to leave me, she was a pretty she had problems, and I've forgiven her, but she used to leave me on the street sometimes, and she would also sometimes wake me up and threaten to commit suicide and drive off. And so this feeling of someone driving off is a trigger for me. Well, my husband has triggers around time. He grew up in a military house. And one time I was late for something and he thought it meant I didn't care about it. And so he drove off. And what that triggered in me was this sense of abandonment. Well, it was a little bit about what he did, because we both should have communicated better, but it was more so about that hurt in my heart. And what I need to do is I need to bring that to God and use my skills and use therapeutic skills on that hurt and not put that on my husband, because that's so much more about what I've gone through and then than it was on him. And he does the same to me. And so we really need to look at where the past is present and work on that as an individual and as a couple, because he also needs to be sensitive about that with me. And I need to know that 5 minutes early is just barely on time with him. And I need to be sensitive to what he needs as well. And we need to not judge one another's triggers. We need to work on our triggers, but also be sensitive to our partner's triggers. So I think that's the best advice I can give.
Dr. Barbara, what's the best way listeners can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I have a local clinic in North Carolina, but if you want to get in touch with me as far as things I do more at a national level, you can go to drbarbaralowe.com, drbarbaralowe.com. And I have I have 2 ebooks that I thought your listeners might be interested in. One is drbarbaralowe.com/self-care. It's a book on self-care that I think can be really good going through the holidays. And then there's another one that's about the dark side of motherhood, where hope for the dark side of motherhood for people who are dealing with issues with stepkids or kids or infertility, or I share part of my story in there as well. And it's /motherhood, hope for the dark side of motherhood.
And all that's on your website.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
Wow. I'm so glad that we connected on LinkedIn, and I know people make fun of me because I dive into LinkedIn more than any other social media, but it's a great tool. It's a great tool.
Actually, I have met some amazing people on LinkedIn, and yeah, I think for some people it's a perfunctory thing, but I've met some great connections on LinkedIn. So plugs, kudos, plugs for LinkedIn.
Yeah. Maybe they'll give us a little money.
That's right. Add money.
Add money. There you go. Dr. Lowe, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it. And I know the listeners appreciate hearing somebody else than me talking a lot to myself. So, but I do that a lot anyway, even without a microphone. But that's another podcast for you and I to discuss down the road.
You are delightful, Tommy. I'm so glad you're doing this. People need a voice, someone to be speaking what they're experiencing, because we have, like we talked about, those allegiances, and we have those, and we need someone to voice it and be like, it's okay, it's normal. And, the struggle is real. So kudos to you for what you're doing. Listeners, keep listening. This is awesome.
One more thing. I'm really bad at this, but and it goes along the lines of LinkedIn. And I remember years ago in one of the LinkedIn groups I was part of, and a mom chimed in to say that there just aren't any mom support groups. And I literally wanted to grab my laptop and throw it across the room, and because I was so angry. And I think this is, you're talking about, finding your faith in God, and having that moment of spirituality where you had that calling. That was me. That was me sitting there. Okay, guess what? I got to find a way to help other dads, because that was our world as men, that, we're still stuck. I've had other guests admit this as well, is that male and female, that as men, we're still stuck in the 50s. I think we're getting closer to the 60s, because we're still afraid to admit that I need a good cry. We're afraid to ask for directions. all that good stuff. And when I read that on LinkedIn, that this mom didn't think there was enough mom groups, I had to, the Irish in me came out and said, where are all the dad groups?
That's right.
And so that's why I love being able to talk to people like you who are, and I know your primary practice is with women, but I know the dads out there, I know the men out there are going to get something out of hearing what you had to say today. So I'm just eternally grateful that, again, that you reached out and you stuck with me today through my lateness.
It's been my pleasure, and I think it is hard to be a man these days, and there's just a lot going on. And I think it's even harder to be a stepdad right now. So thank you for what you're doing, and big hearts out to all the listeners. And again, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Blending the Family. That was an interesting, fun fact during the show.